This is an original iMac,
more commonly referred to as the iMac G3, in its original color, Bondi Blue.
Released in August of 1998, it features a PowerPC 750 processor clocked at 233 MHz, a 4GB hard drive, and 32 MB of RAM. At the time, this was a pretty powerful machine, considering home users were the target market. This product is significant because it marks the time period when Steve Jobs came back to Apple and implemented technologies that he and his team at Next had been building. It could be argued that the iMac ultimately saved Apple from having to declare bankruptcy. That and a little help from Bill Gates. More on that in a bit. I picked this up from Facebook Marketplace because when I saw that it was such an early revision, that meant it would have a tray-loading optical drive. However, I did have to pick up the keyboard and the mouse separately on eBay. Many people remember the original iMac coming in many different colors, but this was not the case until revision C in January of 1999. The model I have here was manufactured in November of 1998, making it a revision B model. Let's take a look at the machine itself. On the front, we have built-in stereo speakers, the tray-loading optical drive, 2 headphone jacks, and the power button. On the right side of the computer, we have this little door with a hole for cable management. Upon opening this door, you'll find 2 3.5mm audio jacks for microphone and speakers, 2 USB ports, 1 Ethernet port, and 1 modem port. On the top of the machine, you will find a handle as well as some vents. Since the monitor is a CRT, it needs a lot of ventilation to cool. The mouse and keyboard are neat because this is one of the first mainstream computers to use USB peripherals. Most PCs would continue to use PS2 into the early 2000s. When I first saw pictures of the mouse, I thought it was going to be so uncomfortable to use, but surprisingly, it's actually not that bad. The keyboard is pretty standard and also nice to type on. One thing I really like is how the mouse plugs right into the keyboard. This is a feature I wish was still on most modern mechanical keyboards today. Another cool thing about the keyboard is that you can power on the whole computer with this button, but it's kind of funny though how in most cases the power button on the keyboard would be right below the power button on the machine. Still a nice touch. The maximum supported operating system version for this machine is macOS 10.3.9 Panther, and you can technically install 10.4.11 unofficially. But when possible, I like to have my vintage technology on the version it shipped with. For someone who grew up during the macOS 10 era, it is really fun to dabble with macOS 8.5. This was the first version of macOS to run strictly on PowerPC processors. The rainbow Apple icon in the menu bar is a pretty cool touch, and it reminds me of Apple GSOS, which was the operating system for the Apple II GS and is another machine that I'm looking to add to my collection someday. Something that I had never dabbled with but got the chance to with this is the Apple Works suite. This had long been discontinued by the time I started using Macs, but it has some really cool features. Of course, it has things like basic word processing and spreadsheets, both of which this computer still handles quite well. The drawing program is fun, and I'm sure it could be used for more complicated things than what I did here. I also really like this database tool and hope to play around with it some more at some point. I am usually pretty good with the history of operating systems and their applications, but I had never heard of this scrapbook application bundled with macOS. It actually seems pretty cool and has some cool features. This graphing calculator application is actually really neat, and it's surprisingly full-featured. The part that's probably most surprising though is just how smooth the graphics are when drawing the graph. An application that'll be familiar to Mac users is Stickies. It was already included in this version of macOS, and I find it funny how there's also a notepad that on the surface appears to accomplish similar tasks. If I were to guess, Notepad likely became TextEdit, which has a very different function from Stickies, and I'm glad that's the case. It wasn't until macOS 10 that system preferences replaced the preference panes that we see here, and thank goodness they did. It's quite hard to navigate these settings, and it's surprising how much the corresponding icons in modern-day system preferences help you move around efficiently. Remarkably, one of the things that hasn't changed too much is the appearance menu. To think we've been able to change the accent and highlight color on our Macs for 25 years now is pretty remarkable. We also get to see a pretty early version of Apple System Profiler. While this is pretty rudimentary by today's standards, we can see how much this application resembles the version that is still available on Macs today. Something really funny I found while messing around was that macOS 8.5 can't go past 2019 when setting the year in the date and time preferences. It just reverts back to 1920. Oh, and remember how I mentioned Bill Gates earlier? Well, part of the deal that Microsoft made to save Apple was that all the new Macs had to ship with Internet Explorer as their default browser. For the unanointed, Bill Gates invested in Apple not to save the company but to save himself. In 1998, Microsoft was under scrutiny from the federal government for being a monopoly. The question central to the case was whether they were allowed to bundle their web browser, Internet Explorer, with the Windows operating system. When Apple was on the brink of collapse, Bill Gates saw an opportunity to keep the competition in business and also make it so that Internet Explorer was no longer exclusive to Windows PCs. When the audience at Macworld 97 found out that IE was going to be the default browser on their Macs, they were less than pleased.
At browsers out there, and Apple has decided
but Steve Jobs assured them that they would be able to change their default browser to something else if they'd like. This deal also changed the course of computing because Microsoft was going to be developing Microsoft Office for Mac. Prior to this, people who were on Mac computers had a hard time collaborating with those on Windows PCs because of incompatibility between Office suites. By developing Office for Mac, it meant that someone could work on a document on their Mac at home, and people on PCs at the office wouldn't have issues opening or editing it. It made it so that people could genuinely choose between Mac and PC without the bottlenecks caused by proprietary software. As a programmer, I like how they were trying to encourage people to host their own web pages and learn how to write HTML code by providing these samples. This is obviously before tools like Weebly, Wix, and Squarespace came about, but not before the time of Yahoo GeoCities, which for those who are unfamiliar, allowed people to get a personal web page up and running easily.
While it may not be very useful today, the iMac G3 holds an important place in Apple's history. As vintage as it may seem, this design actually holds up and is a great looking display piece for any vintage tech collector. Thanks for watching, and I'll catch you in the next video.